be sitting down for practical reasons, breathing, for instance. And I want to start with a question. How much do you think £20 will be worth in a year from now, in May 2024? I know it's a bit awkward question, but we are doing this sort of questions more and more frequently, aren't we? And more often in different countries, not only in countries such as my hometown country, where we've been doing this for at least 40 years now. So let me ask you again, how much do you think £20 will be worth in a year from now? And I really don't want your answers. I want us to stay with the question and with the exercise you probably did to try to answer the question, that is to project a scenario to a year from now. How do you think the world will look like in a year from now? And how do you think this country particularly will look like in a year from now? This type of exercise is very useful, and it's very frequent in finance, for instance. It's called future value. How do we assess our resources will be worth in the future? This exercise is not easy to do in contexts such as the one we're in right now. In the past 40 years, interpersonal trust has fallen in almost every country in the world. We're in a context of deep mistrust, of uncertainty, and this isn't a fertile ground to think about the future. Uncertainty, instead of inviting us to think about the future, often leads us to immobility. You might think of many contexts where this has happened. And those of us who are from the global south might be a bit more used to doing this exercise of taking into uncertainty as another variable in order to think about the future. But it's certainly difficult either way, because are we afraid maybe of getting it wrong, of getting the wrong projections, or are we maybe not very much encouraged to propose to others to take certain costs today in order for future benefits that we don't have any certitude that they will be able to reap? What is the cause behind this? More often than not, we end up giving up in situations like this, and we inadvertently verify this self-fulfilling prophecy of certainty leads to immobility. Uncertainty leads to immobility, sorry. However, when they pressure us, we come up with some certainties. We think about things to do with those £20 in order for them to not lose the value. We can invest them in different things. We can even buy goods, cans of oil, whatever. We can even choose rationally between these options, assess the risks, assess the benefits, and make quite an informed choice. This instinct that we have so incorporated in our maybe personal finance, even corporate finances, disappears when it comes to the public sphere. But the costs and the risks are the same. Well, not exactly the same, because they're not individual costs. They're collective costs. And there might be part of the answer, right? I want to share with you today that there is a relevant role for think tanks to play in projecting the future, even in uncertainty. And that this is a crucial exercise to do in the public sphere in order to achieve a better future and in order to eventually get out of this situation of crisis and uncertainty. I am the executive director of CIPPEC, as Kike mentioned, one of Latin America's leading think tanks. From this role and the past ones I've taken at CIPPEC, I've learned that it is possible, even in contexts of extremely high uncertainty, to project the future. And it is not only possible, it is necessary, because it's the only way we can get out of it. In Argentina, we are now facing a major crisis. Those of you who follow our situation might know about it. It has economic, political, and even now institutional effects. But amidst this crisis, there's a very important achievement that tends to go invisible. We are turning 40 years of uninterrupted democracy in December this year. And this is a major achievement. We had no certitude that we would ever achieve this milestone. However, this major achievement coexists with structural and historic debts. Argentina has not grown for the past 14 years. Almost half of the population lives under poverty, even more so if we focus only on children. This situation is a bit of a paradox because Argentina has everything the world needs right now. It has energy, the second reserve of oil in the world, and gas. It has food, the leading food exporter of flour, soybean oil, and the second largest export of maize. Knowledge. Argentina is a world leader, software developer and exporter. And key minerals. Argentina is the fourth producer and third world lithium reservation. But due to our recurrent situation of macroeconomic stability and rule of law added to the political, economic, and institutional uncertainty, we are not able to seize this opportunity and reap its benefits. At CIPPEC, we believe that the only way to overcome now this long succession of crisis after crisis, it is to project the future, even amidst uncertainty. Because by doing so, we might be able to generate the long-term agreements that we need in order to enable us to have more certainties in the future. Based on this strong belief, 2 years ago, we began to project scenarios for the next 40 years of democracy, hopefully. We named the project Democracy 40. First, we backcasted the next 40 years. We went to 2063 and we thought about it. What certainties do we have for that moment in time? We analyzed the trends that we know will affect us, those few certainties. For instance, the climate crisis. We have no longer any choice to think about it. Or the impact of digitalization on mostly every aspect of our lives and economies and societies. Or the fact that most of our countries are aging. Argentina at a very high pace. Or the shifting of global power. Or the growing concentration of income in fewer hands. Considering this and other trends, we projected these scenarios for Argentina in 2063. Some of these scenarios were positive and some of them were quite negative. What we sought was to understand what could be done today and in the near future to get us closer to the more optimistic scenarios. To do so, we undoubtedly need to face many of our structural problems. And we try to identify which paths would lead us to those resolutions and to those more positive scenarios, but mainly concentrating in which could be the first steps in each one of those long paths, which actions that could enroute us in those directions are possible given the restrictions that we have today. And I'm not speaking solely about fiscal restrictions, which are obvious, but also political, technical, all sorts of restrictions. We did so these actions could be more concrete and more prone to getting the consensus needed for their implementation, and in order to help us reinstitute trust that we need so much, just because they are feasible actions and they might show results in the short term. Just as we did with Democracy 40, we believe that think tanks have a crucial role in leading this prospective thinking, and especially in proposing actions, concrete policies that can help us constitute building blocks for reinstating trust and therefore reducing uncertainty. But in order for this to work forcibly, these exercises need to have three main characteristics. Firstly, obviously, have forward thinking, and you can do this because in facing a crisis, we tend to stay very much in the present, try to worry about reducing the costs in the present, and that's mostly not the way to get out. We need to have a longer term view, and as think tanks, I believe we have the responsibility to do so and to increase the time frame considered in analyzing how to overcome the crisis. Different techniques might be used: forecasting, backcasting, other simulations. But what we always need to bear in mind is that we need to compare the scenario we are projecting and we are proposing to the costs and the benefits of the status quo. This very often goes invisible as well. The status quo tends to be quite costly, and sometimes they say, no, this policy is too expensive because it costs more than zero, maybe. And we don't realize that the status quo and not doing anything about it will cost us much more than that. There are concrete tools to do so, such as input-output matrix, that are useful in simulating these future impacts, both of the things we are proposing and of the status quo. Secondly, the main pillar of any think tanks, applied research, quality applied research. And let me highlight the applied part of it. This is not only identifying the causal mechanisms within a problem, what works to solve it, but mostly what can be done, what concretely can be done in the context and the moment we are working on. And therefore, we need to adapt these possible solutions to the restrictions, the fiscal restrictions in the first place. What can we afford? The political restrictions. What can gain consensus? And the technical restrictions. Does the state have the capacity to implement the policy we are now proposing in the different levels? Can it get to the ground the way we're expecting it to get? Thirdly, this process needs to involve other actors. I'm talking, obviously, the main type of actors is the relevant political forces. They will be involved in the formulation and the implementation of these policies, and if we have a longer term perspective, we should include those who might be in that position in the future, not only in the present. In democracies, how will that power be shifting? But I'm not talking solely about the political sphere. We are discussing structural problems in many cases. And in order to solve structural problems, we need actions and commitments from other actors, not only political, such as unions, private sector, media, civil society, social movements, international corporations sometimes. We need to have those actors sitting in the table to propose and discuss and assess the political viability and the commitment they have to the actions we're proposing. And if we are discussing about things that will have a territorial implementation, we need to have those actors also sitting down. What are the specifics of the territory we're discussing? Which are the particular characteristics that we need to be taking into account? And if we are discussing things with a longer term perspective, we should also assess a possible renewal in the leadership of those sectors and have intergenerational dialogues as well. But in order for all of these solutions to work, we need to continue working for more and better democracies. We need to ensure that all of those who assume governmental responsibilities respect with conviction the rules of democracy, You might be thinking, well, that is an overstatement. I don't think so, given the status of the current world. We are seeing what has happened and what is happening in many countries where outsiders not too committed with democracy have won elections. We are now globally facing an inflection point, I believe. By now, we must know that progress is not only more feasible, but also more sustainable in democracies. Let's not jeopardize the democracy that has been so costly to build in many of our countries. It's time we accept that even in uncertain times, it is possible to project the future, and think tanks play a crucial role in this task. But it is not only possible to do it, it is necessary to forecast. Only then we'll be able to get out of the pessimistic projections that seem unavoidable and move towards the more optimistic scenarios. Let's stop using as an excuse that mistrust and the lack of certainty is not letting us act.